3 weeks after the engagement announcement that shattered her world, Catherine made a decision that shocked everyone who knew her. She packed 2 suitcases, left a note for her parents, and disappeared from the life she had always known. Train journey to Cornwall felt like traveling to another planet. For the first time in months, no one was watching her. No cameras followed her movements. No reporters shouted questions. She sat by the window watching the countryside roll past and felt something she hadn't experienced in years complete. Anonymity. Catherine had chosen the small coastal town of Saltbridge, almost by accident. She had seen a newspaper advertisement for a tiny cottage rental, and something about the description called to her. Peaceful retreat overlooking the sea, it said. Perfect for someone seeking a quiet life. That was exactly what she needed. The cottage was nothing like the grand estate she had grown up in. It had 2 small rooms, a kitchen barely big enough for one person, and windows that rattled when the wind blew. But when Catherine opened the front door and breathed in the salty air, she felt something that surprised her relief. Her landlord, Mrs. Henderson, was a chatty woman in her 70s who had lived in Saltbridge her entire life. "What brings you to our little corner of the world, dear?" she asked as she handed over the keys. "I needed a change," Catherine said simply. It was the most honest thing she had said in months. "Well, you've come to the right place for that." Mrs. Henderson smiled. "Nothing changes much here, and that's exactly how we like it." Catherine decided to use her middle name, Beth. It felt safer somehow, like putting on a disguise that actually fit. Beth was just a regular person who wanted to start over. Beth didn't have a famous family or a scandal following her around. Finding work was harder than she expected. Her fancy education and royal training didn't translate well to small town. Jobs, she couldn't exactly put almost married a prince on her resume. But luck came from an unexpected place. Walking through town one morning, Catherine heard a dog barking frantically from behind a small building with a sign that read Saltbridge Animal Clinic. She followed the sound and found a golden retriever with an injured paw, whimpering in pain while a woman in a white coat tried to calm him down. "Here, let me help," Catherine said without thinking. She knelt beside the dog and spoke to him in the gentle voice she had always used with animals. Growing up, she had been the one who rescued injured birds and took care of the estate's horses. The dog stopped struggling and looked at her with trusting eyes. "You're good with him?" the veterinarian said, impressed. "I'm Dr. Mitchell. You new in town?" "I'm Beth," Catherine replied. "Just moved here." Dr. Mitchell was a kind woman in her 40s who had been running the clinic alone since her assistant moved away. "I don't suppose you'd be interested in a job?" she asked. "I can't pay much, but I could really use someone with your touch." Catherine had never had a real job before, but something about the idea excited her. "I'd love to try," she said. Working at the animal clinic changed everything for Catherine. For the first time in her life, she woke up each morning with a real purpose. She learned to give injections, comfort scared animals, and help Dr. Mitchell with surgeries. Her hands, which had once been soft from a life of luxury, became strong, incapable. The work was hard and sometimes heartbreaking. She cried the first time they couldn't save a pet. And Dr. Mitchell sat with her afterward, explaining that caring too much was better than not caring at all. "The animals can sense when someone really loves them," she said. "That's a gift you can't teach." Slowly, Catherine began to make friends in Saltbridge. There was Ben, who ran the bakery and always saved her a fresh scone for breakfast. There was old Tom, who fixed boats at the harbor and told the most amazing stories about his adventures at sea. There was Rachel, who taught at the local school and invited Catherine to join her book club. None of them knew about her past, and Catherine loved it that way. They liked her for who she was now, not for who she had almost become. She was just Beth, the girl who worked at the animal clinic and had a way with scared creatures. The cottage by the sea became her sanctuary. She learned to cook simple meals, something she had never done before. She took long walks on the beach, collecting shells and watching sunsets that painted the sky in colors she had never noticed when she was too busy being important. On quiet evenings, Catherine would sit by her window and think about her old life. The constant pressure, the endless scrutiny, the feeling that she was always performing for an audience. She realized that she had been living like a bird in a cage, beautiful and admired, but never truly free. Sometimes she missed the luxury and comfort of her family's wealth, but she never missed the feeling of being watched all the time, of having to be perfect every single moment. In Saltbridge, she could laugh too loudly, wear old clothes, and make mistakes without anyone caring. 6 months after her arrival, Catherine looked in the mirror and saw a different person. Her hands were rough from work, her hair was simpler without expensive styling, her face had a tan from spending time outdoors. But her eyes held something they had never had before, genuine happiness. She was no longer the failed royal bride. She was Beth, and for the first time in her life, that felt like exactly who she was meant to be. Catherine had always been told she was born for greatness. From the moment she took her first steps in the grand halls of her family's estate, everyone around her whispered the same thing. That girl will marry a prince someday. Why wouldn't? They think that she had everything a royal bride should have. Her family tree stretched back centuries, filled with dukes and duchesses who had served the crown with honor. She spoke 3 languages perfectly, could play piano like an angel, and knew exactly which fork to use at a 14-course dinner. When she walked into a room, conversations stopped, not just because she was beautiful, but because she carried. Her self-like royalty was already in her blood. At 19, Catherine's world changed forever when she received an invitation that made her mother cry happy tears. The palace wanted her to attend a state dinner. It wasn't just any dinner, it was the kind where unmarried ladies were carefully chosen to sit near Prince Alexander. Everyone knew what that meant. Her first night at the palace felt like stepping into a fairy tale. The chandeliers sparkled like captured stars, and the walls were covered with paintings of kings and queens from centuries past. Catherine wore a deep blue gown that her grandmother had specially made, and when Prince Alexander asked her to dance, she felt like Cinderella. At the ball, "You dance beautifully," the prince said as they moved across the marble floor. His smile was warm, and for a moment, Catherine forgot that hundreds of people were watching their every move. "Thank you, Your Highness," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady, even though her heart was beating so fast she was sure everyone could hear it. That first dance led to many more meetings. For 18 long months, Catherine lived in a strange world between her old life and what everyone expected would be her new one. She attended charity events where photographers followed her every step. She learned to smile even when strangers asked her personal questions. She studied royal protocol until she could recite it in her sleep. The newspapers loved her. They called her the perfect princess and Britain's sweetheart. Magazine covers showed her picture next to Prince Alexander's with headlines like, "When will he propose?" and "A match made in heaven." Catherine's mother started planning a wedding that hadn't been announced yet, but living under a microscope was harder than anyone imagined. Catherine couldn't go to the grocery store without bodyguards. She couldn't laugh too loudly or cry in public. Every dress she wore was analyzed by fashion experts. Every word she spoke was recorded and studied. She began to feel like she was performing in a play, where she never got to leave the stage during quiet moments alone in her room. Catherine sometimes wondered if this was really what she wanted, but whenever doubt crept in, she pushed it away. This was her destiny, wasn't it? This was what she had been trained for her entire life. The prince seemed to enjoy her company. They talked about books and horses and their shared love of classical music. He made her laugh with silly jokes about palace life. When they walked through the royal gardens together, Catherine could almost forget about the cameras hidden in the bushes and the reporters waiting outside the gates. "Do you ever wish you could just disappear for a day?" Prince Alexander asked her one afternoon as they sat by the palace pond, watching swans glide across the water. "Sometimes," Catherine admitted, "don't you?" "All the time," he said quietly. "But I suppose that's not really an option for people like us." Catherine nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. They were both trapped in golden cages, beautiful but confining. As months passed, everyone expected an engagement announcement. Catherine's friends asked when they should buy their bridesmaid dresses. Royal watchers placed bets on when the proposal would happen. Even Catherine began to believe it was just a matter of time. Then everything changed on a Tuesday morning in October. Catherine was having breakfast in her family's dining room when her mother burst in, clutching a newspaper with shaking hands. The headline hit Catherine like a physical blow. Prince Alexander announces engagement to Lady Victoria Pemberton. The world seemed to stop. Catherine stared at the newspaper photo showing Prince Alexander slipping a ring onto another woman's finger. Lady Victoria was blonde where Catherine was brunette, tall where Catherine was petite, and smiling the same confident smile that Catherine had practiced in mirrors for months. There must be some mistake, Catherine's mother whispered. But they both knew there wasn't. The phone started ringing immediately. Reporters wanted statements. Friends wanted explanations. But Catherine had no answers because she had no warning. Just 3 days earlier, she had attended a palace function where Prince Alexander had seemed perfectly normal, perfectly friendly, perfectly distant, she now realized. Within hours, the same newspapers that had called her perfect were now calling her the royal reject. Television shows discussed what had gone wrong. Fashion magazines analyzed whether her style had become boring. Everyone had theories about why Prince Alexander had chosen someone else. Catherine felt like she was drowning in humiliation. She couldn't leave her house without facing cameras and shouted questions. How do you feel about the engagement? Did you see this coming? Will you attend the wedding? Her family tried to protect her, but the damage was done. Catherine had become famous for failing at the one thing everyone expected her to succeed at. She was 21 years old, and she felt like her life was already over. The worst part wasn't the public embarrassment, though. That was terrible enough. The worst part was the growing realization that maybe, just maybe, she had never really wanted to marry Prince Alexander at all. Maybe she had been so busy trying to become the perfect royal bride that she had forgotten to ask herself if that's what would actually make her happy. But it was too late for those thoughts now. The fairy tale was over, and Catherine had to figure out how to live in the real world as the girl who almost married a prince but wasn't good enough to keep him. It was a rainy Thursday morning when Catherine's life took another unexpected turn. She was organizing medicine bottles at the clinic when the door burst open, bringing with it a gust of cold wind and a man carrying a large German shepherd in. "His arms, please. You have to help him," the man said, his voice tight with worry. The dog was unconscious, blood seeping from a cut on his leg. "His name is Rex. He fell during a rescue training exercise." Catherine immediately called for Dr. Mitchell while clearing a space on the examination table. She had seen this man around town before, tall, with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. He always nodded politely when their paths crossed, but they had never actually spoken. "I'm James," he said as they worked together to help Rex. I've heard good things about you from people in town." While Dr. Mitchell examined Rex, Catherine found herself stealing glances at James. There was something about the way he spoke to his dog, so gentle and reassuring, that touched her heart. His hands were steady as he helped hold Rex still, but she could see the worry in his eyes. "He's going to be fine," Dr. Mitchell announced after cleaning and stitching the wound. "But he'll need to rest for a few weeks. No rescue training until I clear him." James's relief was visible. "Thank you both so much. Rex isn't just my dog, he's my partner. We work together on the mountain rescue team." Catherine learned that James was a paramedic who volunteered with the local search and rescue unit. He had moved to Saltbridge 2 years earlier, looking for a quieter life after leaving the military. Like Catherine, he seemed to be someone who had needed a fresh start. "Would it be okay if I brought Rex back for checkups?" James asked. "I want to make sure he heals properly." "Of course," Catherine replied, trying to hide how pleased she felt about the idea of seeing him again. Over the next few weeks, James became a regular visitor to the clinic. He would bring Rex in for his bandage changes, but Catherine noticed he often lingered to chat. He asked about her work, shared stories about his rescue missions, and always thanked her for taking such good care of Rex. "You have a gift with animals," James told her one afternoon, as Rex dozed peacefully on the examination table. "He's usually nervous at the vet, but he trusts you completely." Catherine felt herself blushing. "I've always loved animals. They don't judge you, you know. They just accept you for who you are." James nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly why I love working with Rex. Animals are honest. They don't pretend to be something they're not." There was something in the way he said it that made Catherine wonder if he, like her, had experience with people who weren't quite so honest. Their friendship grew slowly and naturally. James would stop by the clinic even when Rex didn't need treatment, bringing Catherine coffee from Ben's bakery or simply checking in on how her day was going. She found herself looking forward to these visits more than she cared to admit. One evening, James asked if she would like to take a walk on the beach. As they strolled along the shoreline with Rex running happily ahead of them, James began to open up about his past. "I served 3 tours overseas," he said quietly. "Saw things that... well, they change you. When I came back, I couldn't handle the noise and crowds of city life anymore. That's why I moved here." Catherine understood that feeling of needing to escape, though for very different reasons. Sometimes a quiet place is exactly what we need. "To heal," she said. "What about you?" James asked. "What brought you to Saltbridge?" "And don't say you just needed a change. There's more to your story." Catherine's heart raced. She had grown so comfortable being Beth that she had almost forgotten about her previous life. But looking at James, seeing the genuine interest in his eyes, she realized she didn't want to lie to him. "It's complicated," she said finally. "The best stories usually are," James replied with a gentle smile. Their relationship deepened over the following months. James would pick Catherine up after work. They would drive to different spots along the coast, watching sunsets and talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his struggles with loud noises and crowded places, remnants from his military service. She shared her own battles with anxiety and the pressure she had felt to be perfect all the time. They found comfort in each other's quiet understanding. Neither pushed for details about the other's past. Content to build something new together based on who they were now, not who they had been before. One autumn evening, they sat on Catherine's small porch watching the waves crash against the rocks below. James reached for her hand. "I care about you, Beth," he said simply. "More than I've cared about anyone in a long time." Catherine felt her heart swell with an emotion she had never experienced before. Not the nervous excitement she had felt around Prince Alexander, but something deeper and more real. "I care about you too," she whispered. Their first kiss was nothing like the fairy tale moments Catherine had once imagined. There were no cameras, no crowds, no pressure to be perfect. It was just 2 people who had found something genuine and beautiful in each other. But even as happiness filled her heart, Catherine knew she was living on borrowed time. Eventually, James would want to know more about her past. Eventually, she would have to decide whether to trust him with the truth about who she really was. For now, though she was content to be Beth, the girl who worked at the animal clinic and had found love in the most unexpected place. 2 years had passed since Catherine and James had fallen in love, and their small wedding by the sea had been everything she had never known she wanted. No crowds, no cameras, just close friends from Saltbridge, and the sound of waves crashing. On the shore, Mrs. Henderson had cried happy tears. Even gruff old Tom from the harbor had wiped his eyes during their simple vows. Their life together was peaceful and full of purpose. James continued his work as a paramedic and with the mountain rescue team, while Catherine had become Dr. Mitchell's full partner at the clinic. They lived in a slightly larger cottage overlooking the harbor, with Rex and 2 rescue cats they had adopted from the clinic, but there was one shadow over their happiness. For 2 years they had been trying to start a family, and nothing had happened. At first they hadn't worried. They were young and healthy, and they figured it would happen when the time was right. But as months turned into years, Catherine began to feel that familiar ache of disappointment she thought she had left behind. "Maybe we should see a doctor," James suggested gently one evening. As they watched the sunset from their garden, Catherine nodded. Oh, the thought scared her. She had already faced one kind of failure in her life. She wasn't sure she could handle another. The specialist in the nearby city delivered news that hit them like a physical blow. Catherine had a rare condition that made pregnancy extremely unlikely. The medical terms were complicated, but the message was clear. Having biological children would be nearly impossible. "There are treatments we could try," the doctor explained, "but they're expensive, and the success rate is very low. I don't want to give you false hope." The drive home was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Catherine stared out the window at the countryside. feeling like she was failing at yet another thing that was supposed to come naturally to women. "I'm sorry," she whispered to James as they pulled into their driveway. "Sorry for what?" he asked. Turning to face her, "For not being able to give you children? For being broken?" James took her hands in his. "You are not broken, Beth. You are perfect, exactly as you are. We'll figure this out together, okay?" That night, Catherine cried harder than she had since the day Prince Alexander had chosen someone else. But this time, she wasn't alone. James held her close and reminded her that their love was enough. With or without children, Dr. Mitchell, who had become like a mother to Catherine, suggested something that changed everything. "Have you two ever considered fostering?" she asked one day at the clinic. "There are so many children who need temporary homes while their families get help. You both have so much love to give." The idea had never occurred to them, but the more they talked about it, the more right it felt. They attended training sessions, filled out mountains of paperwork, and prepared their home for the possibility of children who might need them. 3 months later, they got a call that would change their lives forever. "We have 2 siblings who need placement," the social worker explained. "Lucy is 8, and her brother Danny is 5. They've been through several foster homes, and they're having a hard time trusting adults right now." Catherine and James looked at each other and knew immediately what their answer would be. Lucy and Danny arrived on a cold winter morning, carrying everything they owned in 2 small backpacks. Lucy held her little brother's hand protectively, her eyes darting around suspiciously. Danny hid behind his sister, clutching a stuffed elephant that had seen better days. "This is your room," Catherine said gently, showing them the space she and James had prepared. They had painted it sunny yellow and filled it with books and toys. "You don't have to share if you don't want to." "We always share," Lucy said firmly. "Danny gets scared if we're apart." Catherine's heart broke a little at the protective tone in the 8-year-old's voice. These children had learned not to trust the adults who were supposed to take care of them. The first few weeks were harder than Catherine had expected. Lucy questioned everything, testing to see if these new adults would abandon them like others had. Danny barely spoke, communicating mostly through looks and gestures to his sister. But Catherine's experience with frightened animals served her well with frightened children. She moved slowly, spoke softly, and never pushed too hard. Left small snacks where the children could find them, just like she did with scared cats at the clinic. She read stories aloud even when they pretended not to listen. James was equally patient. He taught Danny to throw a ball in the backyard, never commenting when the little boy ran back to Lucy after just a few minutes. He helped Lucy with her homework without making her feel stupid for being behind in school. Slowly, carefully, trust began to grow. Danny started talking to Rex, telling the dog secrets he couldn't share with humans yet. Lucy began helping Catherine at the clinic after school, showing a natural gentleness with the animals. One evening, 6 months after the children had arrived, Catherine was tucking Danny into bed when he whispered, "Are you going to keep us?" "Want to?" Catherine said honestly. "That's not entirely up to us. How would you feel about staying here forever?" Danny's eyes filled with tears. "I want to stay with you and James and Lucy and Rex. This feels like home." It's the adoption process. It was long and complicated, but finally, after a year of paperwork and court visits, it was official. Lucy and Danny were legally Catherine and James's children on the day they signed the final papers. Catherine felt a joy she had never experienced before. It was different from the excitement she had felt about possibly marrying a prince. This was deeper, more real, more meaningful, but life had one more surprise in store for them. 2 weeks after the adoption was finalized, Catherine woke up feeling dizzy and nauseous. At first, she thought it was just the stress of the legal proceedings finally catching up with her. But when the symptoms continued, James insisted she'd see a doctor. "Congratulations," Dr. Phillips said with a huge smile. "You're pregnant, about 6 weeks along." Catherine stared at her in shock. "That's impossible," the specialist said. ... "Sometimes the impossible happens," Dr. Phillips said gently. "The stress reduction and emotional fulfillment from your family may have helped your body heal in ways we don't fully understand. It's rare, but it does happen." Catherine drove home in a daze, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. When she told James the news, he picked her up and spun her around their kitchen, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. That night, they told Lucy and Danny that they were going to be big siblings. Lucy's eyes went wide with wonder, while Danny immediately started planning how he would teach the baby to play with Rex. As Catherine lay in bed that night, surrounded by her growing family, she realized that her miracle hadn't been the pregnancy. Her miracle had been finding her way to this life, to these people who loved her not for who she was supposed to be, but for who she actually was. 5 years later, Catherine stood in her garden watching the most beautiful chaos she had ever seen. Lucy, now 13 and tall for her age, was teaching 3-year-old Hannah how to braid flower crowns. 4-year-old Oliver was trying to convince Rex to wear a tiny hat, while 10-year-old Danny referred a disagreement between the twins about whose turn it was to water the vegetables. The cottage that had once seemed too small for just Catherine and James now burst with the sounds and energy. Of 4 children, 2 cats, Rex, and a rabbit named Hopscotch that Danny had rescued and refused to give up. Every morning brought new adventures, and every evening ended with story time in the living room. Children piled on top of each other like puppies. Catherine's pregnancy with the twins had been filled with wonder and worry. After being told she couldn't have children, every day felt like a gift she was afraid might be taken away. But Hannah and Oliver had arrived healthy and perfect, completing their family in ways Catherine had never imagined possible. The birth had been the talk of Saltbridge. Their little town had watched Catherine's journey from the quiet woman who worked at the animal clinic to a mother of 4. Everyone felt invested in her happiness. Mrs. Henderson had become an honorary grandmother. Ben from the bakery always had treats ready for the children, and old Tom had carved wooden boats for each of them. But life wasn't just about their growing family. Catherine's work had expanded beyond the animal clinic. She had started a program that brought rescue animals to the local school, teaching children about kindness and responsibility. What began as a simple idea had grown into something much bigger. Animals and children who have been hurt understand each other, Catherine explained to the newspaper reporter who had come to write about her program. They both need patience, love, and someone who believes in them. The reporter was fascinated by Catherine's story, though she still kept the details of her past private. As far as Saltbridge knew, she was simply Beth Richardson, the woman who had moved to their town years ago and made it a better place. The program had attracted attention from other towns, and soon Catherine was traveling to schools across the county, bringing gentle therapy dogs and rescued cats to children who needed healing. James often joked that she had become famous again, but this time for all the right reasons. One autumn morning, Catherine's carefully constructed new life intersected with her old one in a way she never expected. "There's someone here to see you," Dr. Mitchell said, poking her head into the back room where Catherine was examining a kitten. "He says it's important." Catherine looked up to see a man in an expensive suit standing awkwardly in the middle of the animal clinic. It took her a moment to recognize him without the royal uniform and ceremonial decorations. Prince Alexander looked older, more tired than she remembered. His famous smile seemed forced as he approached her. "Hello, Catherine," he said quietly. She felt her old anxiety spike for just a moment before realizing that it couldn't touch her anymore. She was not the same person who had once desperately wanted his approval. "Your Highness," she replied politely, "what brings you to Saltbridge?" "I was in the area for a charity event, and I heard about the work you're doing here. Wanted to apologize for how things ended between us all those years ago." Catherine studied his face, seeing something she had never noticed before. He looked as trapped as she had once felt. "There's nothing to apologize for," she said honestly. "Made the right choice for both of us." Prince Alexander looked surprised. "I'm not sure I understand." "If you had chosen me, I would never have found my real life. I would never have become who I was meant to be." Through the clinic window, they could see James pulling up in his truck, with all 4 children piled in the back, returning from a trip to the beach. Lucy was laughing at something Danny had said, while the twins were chattering excitedly about the shells they had collected. "Is that your family?" the prince asked, following her gaze. "Yes," Catherine said, and the pride in her voice was unmistakable. They looked happy. "We are," Catherine replied simply. Prince Alexander was quiet for a moment, watching James help the children out of the truck, each of them eager to tell their mother about their adventure. "I always wondered if I had made a mistake," he admitted. "But seeing you now, you're glowing with happiness. I don't think you ever looked at me the way you just looked at your husband." Catherine realized he was right. What she had felt for Prince Alexander had been excitement, ambition, and hope for approval. What she felt for James was love in its truest form, accepting, supporting, and celebrating each other completely. "I hope you find that kind of happiness too," she said sincerely. "Perhaps someday," he replied, though his smile was sad. "Victoria and I, well, let's just say royal marriages aren't always fairy tales." The children burst through the clinic door, Oliver running straight to Catherine with a perfect conch shell clutched in his small hands. "Mama, look what I found." Danny says, "If you listen carefully, you can hear the ocean inside." Catherine knelt down to examine Oliver's treasure, aware that Prince Alexander was watching the interaction with something like wonder. "Can you hear it?" Oliver asked, holding the shell to her. "Ear. I can," Catherine said. Though she was listening to something much more beautiful than ocean sounds, she was listening to the voice of her son calling her Mama, the most precious title she had ever held. When she looked up, Prince Alexander was quietly leaving. Through the window, she watched him get into his official car, and for just a moment, she felt sorry for him. He had everything the world said he should want, but she wondered if he had ever experienced the simple joy of a child running to him with a seashell. That evening, as Catherine tucked each of her children into bed, she reflected on how different her life had turned out from what everyone had expected. She wasn't wearing a crown made of jewels. She had something infinitely more valuable. Lucy hugged her goodnight and whispered, "I love you, Mom. Thanks for not giving up on us." Danny showed her a drawing he had made of their whole family, including Rex and all the cats, standing in front of their cottage with huge smiles. Hannah and Oliver, tired from their beach adventure, fell asleep holding hands in their shared bed, sandy shells still clutched in their small fists. Later, as Catherine and James sat on their porch watching the stars come out over the harbor, she thought about the woman she used to be, the one who had measured her worth by other people's expectations and approval. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Prince Alexander had chosen you?" James asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Never," Catherine replied without hesitation, "'cause then I wouldn't have you or Lucy or Danny or the twins. Wouldn't have this life, even though you could have been a princess." Catherine looked at her husband. This man who had loved her when she was broken and celebrated with her when she healed, would become a father to children who needed one and who made her laugh every single day. "I'd rather be your wife in there, mother than anyone's princess," she said. James squeezed her hand. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the ocean and the distant sound of Rex barking at something in the garden. Catherine had learned that real crowns aren't made of gold and jewels. They're made of moments like these, of love freely given and joyfully received, of children who call you Mama, of work that makes the world a little better, and of the peace that comes from being exactly who you're meant to be. She had found her kingdom, and it was more beautiful than any palace could ever be.